This is Tim,
I'm Mulele.
and this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo on Skype. Mulele's doing well in his Kickstarter. I'm doing okay on the usual stuff here. Yeah. And,
that's the news update.
yeah, and we got a couple comics to talk about.
Right.
Sent in by the people who made them. And the first one is called Vengeance, Nevada. Story and characters by B.J. Mendelson. Art and letters by Piotr Czaplarski.
Sorry, real quick. Do we have an email or some other sort of comment thing that we can hear before?
So, yeah, BJ wrote to me. He said, "My name is BJ Mendelson. I'm the author of the cult classic Social Media is Bullshit from St. Martin's Press. I have a new comic book out on Comixology called Vengeance, Nevada. I've included a PDF link here with the full 27-page comic for review consideration."
Okay. Very straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah, so... Alright, so the first scene of this comic, it says it's happening now, and there's a woman with glowing blue eyes walking into a home. She talks to the cat and says to the cat, "You won't mind if Kristen and I stay here tonight, do you?" But she's not with anyone else. And that scene goes on a little bit, and she starts singing David Bowie's Starman.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
I didn't catch I don't know the lyrics.
And then that carries over into the next scene, which is in the past. It just says it's then, the California-Nevada border. And we see apparently the same woman, but without the glowing blue eyes. And she's singing Starman there also. And she's talking electronically with an overweight man who calls her Jacobs. And they're exchanging niceties, and they're talking about her husband and son. And then as they're talking, we're seeing those word balloons over a scene of a superpowered battle. And Jacobs and a couple other women are fighting some guys in full-face masks. One of the women shoots rays. Jacobs grabs one of the guys and puts him right in the path of the ray, and he gets zapped. She runs off. And then another woman, the one who shot the ray, looks at the guy lying on the floor. He's smoke coming out of his chest. And it's a little unclear, like, when is this fight happening? What's, before or after the other action in the story? What's the fight about? I felt like there were too many questions raised by that. Then it gets really disorienting to me. I had to go over it several times to kind of put it together. Suddenly, we're back with Jacobs in her car, and there's another character standing outside the car who kind of looks like her, but's also a robot or something. And there's an exchange between them, and then also mixed in are some panels of that fight scene, or the aftermath of it, and the guy who's been blasted is Jake, who is, we picked up from the conversation earlier, is Jacob's husband. And he says, "Don't tell Kristen." And I said, "Who is Kristen?" Because the glowing blue-eyed woman was talking about being with Kristen. He says, "Don't tell Kristen." I was like, who is Kristen? But since he is Jake, who Jacobs was talking about, I figured, okay, well, she must be Kristen Jacobs. And actually, on the third time through, I noticed that her coffee cup says Kristen on it, although the barista has spelled it wrong, apparently, which doesn't help us anymore in sort of orienting ourselves here and figuring out who's who. Because in the dialogue it's spelled with a K, and on the cup it's spelled with a CH. So I felt like that was kind of confusing. And then that we go back to Kristen Jacobs and the robot character who is a shapeshifter and makes herself look like Kristen or something. But I still don't quite understand what was happening in that first scene. If Kristen and I stay here, that was still, and that's never explained to the rest of the issue, because I read the whole 27-page PDF, but there was no explanation there. The last scene introduces some other characters, and I was thinking I needed more information there. And there was a lot of action going on kind of in the background there. There are people stepping through interdimensional portals or something, and I kind of wanted to step back from that scene a little bit and get a wider view of what was going on there. It felt kind of crowded. Also, what is Zombie and Landers? Did you notice several places in here? They're like in the first scene, there's a sign on the wall that says Zombie and Landers, brains and feelings.
Yeah, I did see that.
And also the overweight guy that she was talking to from her car has a t-shirt that says Zombie and Landers. But that is also left unexplained. So, I mean, I just felt like this whole issue just left us with too many questions and not enough to really push us forward into wanting to read the next issue.
That's a very kind... yeah.
Well, how did you feel about it?
Okay, first off, the artwork. I felt that the artist is somewhat competent in rendering, but isn't very clear on a lot of the setups to scenes. And it starts off fairly stiff on the first page, but you kind of see the artist get better as the issue progresses at kind of working with the characters, as if the artist began to kind of understand what he wanted each person to do as he went along. But I recognize that because that's somehow the way sometimes the way I work. Yeah, when I go back and look at like the first page, it's usually a mess, and I have to kind of reconstruct certain things or. Anyway, the book is full of references to things you may or may not get. For me, example, the lyrics of Starman, because, I was never a David Bowie fan. I like some of his stuff, but, I grew up with Let's Dance, not Ziggy Stardust. But there are some tongue-in-cheek jokes here that are also thrown in, but don't really land because there's nothing to contrast it with. Everything seems to be kind of an inside joke or a reference to something that the writer is very clear on and is very clear in his sphere of friends. But for us, reading this thing perhaps halfway around the world from Nevada, it really doesn't do anything. It really doesn't. It doesn't say anything. And just if this comic is purely digital, then I can understand some of the choices here for coloring. But if it's going to be printed, it's going to be an expensive black and white book. The use of color here has no rhyme or reason that I can discern.
Well, yeah, it seemed like it was, that the shape-shifting character is always colored.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was meant to be some way to differentiate her from the person that she's taking the shape of. I thought that was kind of interesting, actually. But Yeah, I mean, I feel like there is some sort of logic to how the color is being used, but yeah, you're right. From a practical standpoint, that could, if you printed it, yeah, it would be an expensive book for black and white.
Well, I would say that it's not necessarily confusing as much as it is kind of a bad choice.
Hmm.
And it kind of leaves me with the question of why this way. This kind of color usage is something that you'd see in The Wizard of Oz, but it doesn't really do anything here. It sounds like a bad idea. There's no reason for the colors to be so vivid and so bright on this character and everybody else to be in black and white. Also, you've got a better use for it, which would be now and then, because within then there's a further back then.
Yes.
There's a then within a then. And that entire sequence, I'm so busy reading shit that it's hard for me to focus on the other story, which is going on in the background.
Yes.
They seem kind of unrelated. It seems to me that the writer is throwing a lot at the comic, a lot of ideas, but he's not fleshing out any of them, and it is just leaving me kind of confused as to what he wants to say about what, because none of it seems relevant to me in regards to the story. And so I hate to say it, but it feels to me like the writer is just inexperienced and is kind of hiding behind his own words. The story itself it should not be so complex as to need such heavy verbiage. But even so, what he has here does not forward the story. I don't know who these people are, let alone why they are talking to each other this way for so long on these pages.
Yeah, I really don't know who anyone in the story really is, or what their motivations are, or I feel kind of a distance from the whole thing because I haven't really been pulled in by anyone.
Yeah, there are people who say show don't tell, but he's not telling us, but he didn't show us either. And so there's that kind of problem here. We've got a series of images which tell an incomplete story. A series of words here that also tell an incomplete story, but different to the first incomplete story.
Yeah, when I'm looking at it now and picking up other details that I didn't get before, like, while that whole conversation about Jacob's family or whatever is going on, and that battle, and there's a woman here who's holding a book that says Samantha Quinn on the front. I suppose it's some kind of file or something. Looked like maybe they broke into a vault to steal a file, but we don't know who Samantha Quinn is either, or why they wanted it. And so, yeah, it's just it comes off as some kind of mindless action going on.
Yeah. It really becomes incoherent at a certain point. And I halfway through was like, what the fuck is this guy on about? What does he want me to get from this?
Yeah.
And I really felt that it was the writer who needed to be reeled in a bit and really focus on what he wanted to say here.
Yeah.
The artist kind of knows what he wants to do. Although I would say for the artist, more on the background details. There are some pages here which are kind of really pretty one-shots, but really don't push the story forward because they're a little bit disjointed. or they seem to kind of lack context. And there's also a large responsibility for the writer here, not adding anything to that. In fact, detracting from it with a story that is unrelated. There's absolutely no lip service given to any of the then within then story. That just made shit confusing.
Yes.
Also, I would say at the end of the story, the woman with the blue eyes, her eyes were glowing orange for a bit. Somewhere. I can't even remember where. Oh, yeah. So after the then bit, we kind of flash back to her, the apartment. It's just one shot at the end of page 23. One panel where her eyes are glowing orange. And I'm kind of like, well, what the fuck is this? And then we switch to Chicago. So also, there seems to be like gearing up for a battle, getting ready to do a thing or some sort of defense thing or some sort of going to save something. But there is not a single person in this comic who is not a hero or a villain of some sort. There are no stakes here. There's just a bunch of people fighting in an empty background for nothing. And that's where it that was the final thing that, okay, this comic it doesn't know what it's doing. And so, yeah, I hate to say it, but this comic is not ready for prime time.
And I mentioned the place where I really started getting confused was on page 12, and it might have been because I took a little break part way through, but I was disoriented to kind of go back to the car from the fight scene, and then there's that one panel in the middle of page 12 that's back at the fight scene where Jake is being unmasked, and somehow I got the impression that was happening on the ground in front of her car. I was putting it into the same scene, and it's not. And then on the next page, that first panel is that again, and the woman who, I guess her name is Daiko, although she doesn't look Japanese at all, is saying Jake, and he says, "Don't tell Kristen." And I was sort of, I don't know, I was just getting confused about what was going on where, and yeah, so the transitions are kind of jarring sometimes, and that feels like it, again, might be more the writer's fault, because he hasn't thought about how to smoothly, get us from one scene and one place and one time in the story to another.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of really, really bad editing here, and the writer would benefit from working with an editor. Hire an editor out. There are plenty. In fact, Tim could sort you out. Hire him.
Sure.
But I would say most of this falls on the writer thinking that he's clever instead of just working with the nuts and bolts of story writing. The story is lost here. In its attempts to be clever, and there's a lot of extraneous detail without the meat and potatoes. It's like having a plate full of garnish.
And it feels like it's not the first issue, because it's referring to so many things that are not explained here, that it would be fine maybe if those things had been talked about in a previous issue, but this is part 1, so yeah, we're kind of disoriented.
Well, I mean, that is the thing, like in media res is when you're supposed to do that, but you have to very quickly answer those questions or start on a pathway to answering those questions that the reader can discern. Because if you don't, then you just got a lot of question marks at the end with no real motivation to go on to the next one. And, coming to the end of this book, my feeling was, wow, I'm glad that's over. It was under 30 pages, and I read it, and now I'm going to review it. But I am not about issue number 2. So, yeah, the questions that the audience goes into this with are, what is it? Why should I care about it? What's cool about it? Stuff like that. But none of that is answered here. And the story itself has no prayer here except for the artist, but the artist can only carry so much. Mm-hmm. And the artist does actually a fairly decent job of pushing through a lot of the material. But the writer then betrays all of that work with this nonsense narrative. And it sounds kind of harsh, but to be honest, this kind of thing really makes me angry. When a writer takes away from the art rather than the art actually bringing something to the art to kind of explain things. Comics really are an art-based medium in my mind. Not in my mind, on the page. Without the art, it is not comics. It's just prose. And if you want to do it that way, that's fine. And there are tons of incredible things that are done in that medium that cannot be done in comics. But in this case, in the case of a comic, it is a comic because the art is integral to it being that. And it seems here that the artist did do a not 100%, but a fairly decent job of conveying what he understood as a story. But then the writer comes in and removes coherency from that. And that pisses me off. He took something that was relatively together and dismantles it and leaves us with a bunch of parts. But this is not a jigsaw puzzle that I want to put together. Looking at those parts on the floor, like, I'll leave that for someone else.
Okay. So if anyone wants to take a look at it, it's available on Comixology. I couldn't find any way to get it for free. It's not a webcomic. But anyway, that's Vengeance, Nevada. Our other comic is Teenage Mutant Ninja Pizza. And this is from Daniel Arruda, Massa, and Nick Marino, the guys who did Holy Fuck sometime before. And Daniel wrote to us, said, you have previously critiqued 2 books I worked on, Holy Fuck and Holy Fucked. I don't know if it interests you at all, but a couple months ago, Nick Marino and I made a short 8-page comic that might interest you.
One point before that, they also worked on, or one of them worked on Super Haters.
I think Nick was the writer of that.
Yeah, and I super hated that book and have been very vocal about that, but absolutely loved Fucked and what is it? Fuck, Holy Fucked, Holy Fucked.
Yeah.
I love both of those books. Holy Fuck, the first one, is actually, in my opinion, much better than the second one. But the second one was playing off of my nostalgia for the first one, so they both kind of worked for me. But
that's how sequels work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was no Empire Strikes Back, but is what I'm saying. But the going into this without remembering all of that, and then remembering that later, it kind of switched some things for me. But anyway, we'll get into it in a second. But yeah. Go ahead.
So this is pretty much what it sounds like. It's basically a parody of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with slices of pizza in place of the turtles. This world that they're in is primarily made up of sort of pig people, all drawn very cutely. and their trainer is a half-eaten hoagie sandwich. And it's just kind of a fun comic, and they're fighting against a wedge of cheddar cheese called cheddar, I thought it was fun, and actually it felt to me almost like it could be on Cartoon Network. I mean, they might be getting a phone call from Tartakovsky or whoever. The only thing that sort of threw me off a little bit was on page 7, where the last half of the page is like 20 little tiny panels of like silent panels of us kind of what happened to this minor character, and I found that part a little hard to follow, and I just felt like it slowed down the whole comic. I wasn't quite sure what that was doing there, but the rest of it I enjoyed.
Interesting. I looked at the artwork and I thought, okay, it's very simplistic, but it knows exactly what it needs to do, and it's doing it. Each shot was correct. The colors were nice. It was nicely rendered. There was really no superfluous stuff. Although I did have a question. The names of the slices of pizza are Ditko, Kirby, Schuster, and Severin.
Yeah.
Who's Severin?
What's his name? Art Severin? He was one of the early Marvel guys.
Okay, sorry. Not a Marvel guy, but Ditko, Kirby, and Schuster are big enough that I've heard of them.
John Severin. Okay, sorry. So he worked on EC stuff in the 50s, worked on Sergeant Fury at Marvel, and so on. Artist of that era.
Okay. And I kind of wonder if the characteristics of the slices of pizza mirror any of the characteristics of the artists that they're named after. From what I understand, Ditko's was pretty interesting.
Yes.
I don't know what else to say there, but anyway. I liked the art, and I liked the pacing of the story. It was very, very furious pacing, but it stripped down so completely that it worked. I mean, it's playing so strongly within its own tropes that there's no room for anything else. And getting something like Ditko, Kirby, Severin, and Schuster, if they've played with that correctly, then it works. That's all you really need. But I kind of liked some of the expressions on the characters. Although I have to say the half-eaten hoagie is a little bit disturbing. And I liked the flow of the comic. I liked the design of the bad guy, who's a piece of cheese called cheddar.
Cheddar.
And instead of the kind of the ninja fighting tool things that the bad guy in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has on his arms, he's got cheese graters. It was cute. Cute. But that page with the 20 little panels at the bottom, I love that. For me, that's my opinion of the comic was instantly raised at that page. Because it's the usual shit. It's the usual shit all the way through, and then suddenly, boom, we get this like kind of somewhat dark telling of this person trying to find her team, and it's done all with emojis, and yeah, it doesn't have a happy ending. It's like she goes home, showers, gets in the bed, cries, and then back to the battle. For me, that is kind of an Austin Powers joke. In one of them, they kind of like talk about one of the henchmen and how he has a family and all of that stuff. If I'm remembering correctly, it's been a while since I saw those films, but is that I think the fact that it takes you out of the action to talk about this one minor character who's going through shit because her team is out there fighting and she doesn't know what happened was just kind of a lovely gag in itself. And the fact that they took like 20 panels on half a page when you got three panels of them fighting up top, and there's so much wasted space there. It's just like or I shouldn't say wasted, it becomes part of the gag that you've got all this space at the top, and then you got these like really tiny panels at the bottom. Story. It's so dark. But I loved that. And then we get to the end, and I really began to enjoy the cheese puns. And even when they weren't quite right, or weren't quite funny, they were on point. And I kind of like that. Where he says, "You cut my cheese." Yeah, I quite liked it. We got to the end, and we've got all of these character sketches, and then there's like these two characters at the bottom. One seems to be a Shaolin egg, and the other one seems to be like a Bruce Pickle. I don't know what they are, but I would love to see more.
Yeah. I guess these characters don't show up until the next issue or something.
Yeah, but I had fun. I really liked it. It's well drawn and well executed on a poor concept. So this is a parody of a parody that is about 30 years too late. But I had fun. And then I get to the end, and it has the bio of the two people who created it. It's like, oh, holy fuck. And then I see there are some others that they've made, and I'm thinking, I would like to check out those too, like Cougar and Cub. I can kind of imagine. But and then I see Super Haters, I'm like, I'll have to go in with a little bit of a critical eye on some of them, but in my mind, there's so much goodwill from Holy Fucked, and now this one that I wouldn't mind going to check out those other books.
Well, I mean, Super Haters has been quite a while ago. I mean, Nick Marino's clearly upped his game since then.
Sure. But like when a director puts his name on a movie, it puts his best work forward. But after a certain point, any film that didn't work for them as well, that they kind of push to the background, it's like, okay, leave name off that, dude. You say M. Night Shyamalan from the creator of The Sixth Sense, that's fine. But you say from the creator of whatever his first two films were, I can't even remember. He's never written them on any of those movies to promote himself. So I would say leave that one off the resume.
Yeah. Okay. And they're making this available on Gumroad, so that's the place to go looking for it. And of course, I'll link in the show notes.
I read this one after I read the first one. So the first comic we reviewed, sorry, I can't remember the name.
Oh, Vengeance Nevada.
Yeah, Vengeance Nevada. I was thinking of like something Arizona, but anyway. Yeah, I read that one first, and I was kind of in a bad way. And then I read this one, and it kind of fixed me. And that could actually add to the enthusiasm I have for this comic. But regardless of that, if you're having a bad time and you read this, I think it's a bit of a pick me up. It's bright, it's fun, it's clever. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So if you'd like us to critique your comics, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. I'm on Twitter at deconcomics. And Mulele?
I'm at Mulele Redux on Twitter and mulele.com, but I haven't touched that website in a year. I'm looking at a major revamp and relaunch soon.
Okay, so till next time, this is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
Thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.